Okay, so let's talk about Parliament. You know that picture you have in your head? Ancient, unchanging, just steeped in tradition? But what if the biggest tradition of Parliament is actually change itself? That's exactly what we're going to unpack here.
It really all starts with this question. When did the way Parliament works become so sacred, so untouchable? It's not like there was a specific vote or a big declaration. It was more of a slow creep, where the idea of keeping things exactly as they are started to feel more important than the idea of letting them evolve.
And what's so fascinating is that when you get right down to it, we're often not protecting the core idea of democracy. We're protecting its habits. You know, the late nights, the shouting matches, those super intense sitting weeks, and a whole bunch of rituals that, let's be honest, most people couldn't really explain why we still do them. These aren't deep principles, they're just routine.
And because these habits are so baked in, just suggesting a change can feel like you're attacking the whole system. If you say, hey, maybe Parliament could work different hours, people might call you radical. If you question the layout of the room, it's seen as disrespectful. It's almost like heresy, right?
But here's the big twist in all of this. That argument, this is how it's always been, it's just not true, not even close. If you actually look at the history, it's a story of constant and sometimes pretty radical change.
So, let's ask it plainly. Has it really stayed the same? Well, the historical record gives us a really clear answer. The moment you step back from today, you see that the only reason Parliament has survived this long is because it has always been able to adapt.
Just look at this list. The scale of these changes is massive when you think about it. Who gets to vote? Who can even be an MP? The very idea that they get paid for the job, women finally being allowed in, and something we totally take for granted now, the public actually being able to hear the debates. Every single one of these was a huge, controversial fight at the time.
And that's the absolute key here. None of this was easy or obvious when it happened. It all came after years of fierce debate. But today, all of these things feel completely inevitable, like they're essential pillars of our democracy. And that alone should make us stop and think about what we consider untouchable right now.
All right, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the actual building itself, because the physical chamber is another place where the myth is often way more powerful than the reality.
You know, you often hear people talk about the Commons Chamber in these almost holy tones. Like it's this ancient sacred space, a physical manifestation of centuries of wisdom, perfectly designed for its purpose.
Yeah, it isn't. It's really that simple.
The chamber we see on TV today is actually a post-World War II rebuild, thrown up after the original one was bombed. It was designed under incredible pressure and built pretty quickly because, you know, the country had slightly bigger things on its mind at the time. It's a product of recent necessity, not ancient design.
And once you realize that, a much bigger question starts to form. If the way they do things isn't ancient, and the building isn't ancient, then what exactly are we protecting so fiercely? This brings us to the absolute heart of the matter.
This slide just lays it out perfectly. There are two totally different ways of thinking here. On one side, you have the goal of protecting the institution itself, its purpose, its future. And on the other, you have the instinct to just protect the way it happened to work at one specific moment in time.
So the first way of thinking is stewardship. This is all about looking after the fundamental purpose of Parliament. You know, democracy, accountability, representation, and making sure it stays strong and effective for whatever comes next.
And the other way of thinking, well, it's just habit. That's when we defend certain practices not because they're the best way to do things, but simply because, well, that's just the way we're used to doing them.
And this line just captures that confusion perfectly. Familiarity has a habit of dressing itself up as principle. We get so used to something that we start to believe it's the only right way, the principled way, even when it might be holding us back.
So after all that, where do we land? Well, it leaves us with a much clearer, much more useful question to ask ourselves about the future.
And here it is. This is the main takeaway. The idea that Parliament shouldn't change, that's not a defense of its history. It's a complete misunderstanding of it. The real history of Parliament is the history of change. You see, this reframes the whole conversation. The debate shouldn't be this simple tug-of-war between change and no change. The real question, the much better question is, since we know Parliament has always adapted, which changes do we need now to strengthen it for the future?
And that leads us to the final, and maybe the most powerful, question of all. Before we can figure out how to improve it, we have to agree on its fundamental purpose. So, what do you think Parliament is actually for? That's something to think about.